Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here among farmers, despite the positions we all have in different institutions. We are all farmers, and it's always a pleasure to be among them.
Thank you very much for the first time here in Argentina for our Congress. A continuación lo que vamos a hacer
Now we will listen to the American senator. He will explain what happens in Nebraska. And then Alfredo de Angeli will give his opinions, and last Gilberto Alegre, a congressman, and then we will have a Q&A session. Now we have the translator for the senator.
Buenos dias, thank you. I am John Kuehn. I am from Nebraska in the United States of America, and it is truly my pleasure today to be joining your Congress in my first trip here to Argentina. Certainly, as we take a look at some of the issues associated with ag policy, many of the issues that we will be addressing in the coming decades are global issues. So while some of the details may be somewhat unique to Nebraska or somewhat unique to Argentina, we face many of the same global challenges. So if we can get this to come forward here. A little bit about who I am and what my background is. I have a wide variety of different interests in which have brought me here to visit with you today. First and foremost, I am a fourth-generation farm producer, agricultural producer in the state of Nebraska. Nebraska in the United States is the #1 state for irrigation and acres under irrigation. We're the #1 state in the United States for fed cattle and cattle production. We are also #2 in the United States for corn-based ethanol production. So both crops, livestock, and the biofuels industry is important to Nebraska. I'm also a large animal veterinarian. I received my doctorate in veterinary medicine from Kansas State University. I currently serve as a state senator for District 38 in Nebraska, which is in the rural portion of our state. My district represents one of the largest corn-producing counties in the United States, as well as one of the largest ethanol plants in the state. In addition, I am also have a tenured professorship at Hastings College, which is a private institution in central Nebraska, so I have an academic interest as well. So science-based agricultural policy is one of my top priorities, both personally and professionally as a producer, politically as a member of the state Senate, as well as an academic point of view and a perspective from which the concept of ensuring that we have science-based discussion about ag policy is absolutely critical. Got an issue with the screen. Get a quick issue figured out here with the screen for you there. All right, and it looks like we've got the English version up for you, so you can bear along with me. In addition to my focus in science-based policy, I became interested in this concept that I'm going to visit with you today about briefly called right to farm, as a result of several large policy concerns that I have as an elected representative in a state in which agriculture is the #1 priority. First, my concern as a producer is ensuring that we have ag production systems that are ultimately viable. So we have systems that not only are profitable and allow farmers to undergo and make a profit for what they do, but also systems that have long-term viability in the greater economy. Now, the term sustainability has often been utilized in association with environmental sustainability, but we also know from a policy perspective that sustainability means ensuring that our operations sustain from generation to generation, as well as continue to maintain the stability of our rural communities. The health and the economic vitality and the social structure and fabric of our rural communities is inextricably linked to the success and productivity of agriculture in the United States. And finally, I think it is an ethical imperative that the discussion about policy around agriculture be science-based. And we've all seen, for a large degree, many of the issues that have surrounded misinformation about many of the ag practices and biotechnology that exists. So most of you have probably heard and seen much of the stigmatization around genetically modified organisms and the like. These are an international effort in many cases. So, for example, Greenpeace has launched a global political effort against GMOs, prompting 107 Nobel laureates to sign a letter that is going to address the issue of GMOs and to push back against this international political effort. We also see on the livestock production side globally a continued attempt to misrepresent normal animal husbandry methods and present them as cruel, as inhumane, and in some cases unenvironmental. And up on the screen is a favorite picture of mine that we see on social media. We see on the right side of the screen a picture of what is a rather normal procedure in a cow-calf operation. It's actually saving the calf's life by pulling it through a complicated birth. And what we see is a social media post which characterizes it as cruel and inhumane and setting that calf up for an inhumane death. So the challenge becomes how we as policymakers and how we as an agricultural industry can ultimately respond to what seems at times like a global effort of misinformation about what we do in agriculture. Up until this point in history, government and agriculture primarily focused on how the government promoted agriculture. So issues such as subsidies to support farmers through difficult commodity times or tax policy provided a degree of protection for agriculture were the main interface between government and policy and agriculture. But in 2016, both in the United States and certainly globally, we see that there are a whole host of other areas that the government has become intersected with agricultural policy. We now see government policy affecting and regulating modern agricultural practices, whether that includes antibiotic use, the utilizations of common chemicals such as antiparasiticides and animal health products for livestock, as well as growth promotants that are vital to red meat production within many sectors of the global economy. We also see government policy becoming associated with genetically modified organism use and labeling in consumer food products. We see greater regulation of crop protection products, including fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, and other biotechnology that is being employed by modern agriculture. And this is somewhat troubling. We are now producing more food, more fiber, and more fuel than ever before in the history of the world, and we're doing it on fewer acres, with less water, with less hydrocarbon and energy use, and a smaller environmental footprint. But each of these new technologies that are adopted by modern agriculture is now receiving a greater degree of pushback by a public and electorate, and they're utilizing policy means as a way of achieving their political objectives. We're also seeing greater discussion about land use and zoning, where and how livestock operations and livestock processing facilities are sited, as well as the role and intersection with crop production and normal practices such as the use of pesticides and herbicides in areas where residential areas have expanded into traditionally agricultural production areas. In addition, as we see governments around the world adapting to and responding to the scientific evidence regarding climate change, we're seeing greater suspicion of agriculture and its use of water and its use of energy. And how we are going to respond now as an agricultural community in terms of good public policy becomes the challenge. That's what led me to introduce in Nebraska the concept of right to farm. Right to farm is a constitutional principle, and it outlines in the Constitution of the state of Nebraska the role and the protection of agricultural practices within our state. The state of North Dakota and the state of Missouri have already adopted this principle. Voters in Oklahoma will take this issue up on the ballot in November. And it is a movement aimed at protecting agriculture from government overreach and encroachment, as well as establishing a very clear policy objective and a political statement from government that in areas in which agriculture is essential for the economic stability and the food security of the nation, that the policies adopted by that government will be in the best interest of agriculture and based in science, not based in emotion or based in other areas of fear and miscommunication and misinformation. So the text of Right to Farm is associated, but I want to give you a little bit of background in terms of what Right to Farm is actually trying to do. Certainly no single legislative principle can address all of the complicated issues of biotechnology and ag production and its utilization in a policy perspective. But it does do three important things for us, and is why this concept of right to farm as a constitutional principle is one of my major policy objectives as an elected official and as an ag producer. First, we need to ensure that all agricultural policy is science-based in its discussion. So non-science-based activist communication that influences the political process would be inhibited by a constitutional right to farm protection. I suspect that in Argentina, just like it is in Nebraska and in the United States, agricultural representatives in our elected government bodies are in a very, very significant minority. Fewer and fewer individuals have a connection to agricultural practices and to the farm. Even fewer of those producers are actually serving in our legislative bodies and in government roles. With fewer elected representatives with a first-hand knowledge of agriculture and the science and biotechnology employed in modern agricultural production, outside influences and special interest groups have a greater influence over the political process and of policy. Constitutional right to farm limits legislatures from being able to pass restrictive practices and restrictive policies against agricultural production. So it gives a resistance to that political pressure that can be ultimately damaging to agriculture. The second thing that a constitutional right to farm protection does is establishes a very specific legal standard. And under the United States legal system, it's a concept called strict scrutiny. So the statement in the language we use is that the legislature can pass no law without a compelling state interest. So those that are of the common good, so things like water quality, preserving water resources, preserving our air, and sustainability, represent a compelling common good and can be regulated if the science demonstrates a need to do so. What constitutional right to farm does is establishes a strict scrutiny test that ensures that it is not the burden of the agricultural producers to demonstrate that the government regulation is burdensome or onerous or impedes the financial viability of agriculture. Instead, the burden lies with the government. The government must prove that its regulation and its restriction is first and foremost in the interest of the state and the common good. It also requires that the government must make the policy in the least restrictive way possible. So broad, sweeping regulations that have a major significant impact on ag practices and the agricultural community would be prevented. It means that policy must be done with a scalpel and not with a hatchet. The third issue is one that is political. Serving in elected office, we know that there is good policy and then there is good politics. And sometimes those two come together and sometimes they don't. What Right to Farm does is Right to Farm sends a signal to the nation, and it sends a signal to business interests, it sends a signal to investors and consumers in a clear political message that the government values science-based policy. That rather than responding based on emotion or misinformation or social media trending Twitter-type hashtags, policy is going to be maintained in an evidence-based fashion. And sending that signal clearly to consumers, to ag producers, and to investors creates stability and confidence in the agricultural sector and ensures that food security and food stability continues to remain a primary function of government at all levels. local, state and provincial, national, as well as international. So with that basic background into the right to farm concept, I look forward to hearing more from some of my counterparts in Argentina, and I look forward to taking your questions regarding this principle and how it may apply to protecting agriculture and promoting science-based policy in Argentina. The contact information is available, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, John. Muchas gracias, Senador John Kuehn. Es el turno ahora del senador Alfredo de Angeli.
Dios, dijo, voy a hablar despacio. Vamos a ver con qué sale este, va a salir.
Sí. Hola.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. I would like to congratulate you on the organization. Thank you for having invited me. Mr. Kuehn, welcome to Argentina. My friend, Congressman, thanks for being here with us. Kuehn, I will speak today, and I am the one who said I would never be involved in politics. I started from a need in the Union, and when I saw politics took a different road, which was not appropriate for producers, then I had no chances. I had to get involved in politics. Sometimes you say something and then you end up doing something different. President Mauricio Macri, when he was a congressman, he had told me, come and join us. Don't be part of the union any longer. Come and join us in the big league. And now I'm a senator. I am supporting our president. We have been working together for 7 months. We have faced several challenges. We have worked hard. We have several issues to solve. We are a group of people from the producers community. I can see some of them here. We are committed to support our agricultural sector, which has been beaten lately. We have to look forward to the future. It's very important to support on the involvement of different organizations which have worked hard to improve the production level, mainly primary production fields. This is not enough. We don't have to think of being the barnyard of the world. We have to be the suppliers for the world. We have to put the producers and the industry together. But that is not enough. We also need to get the support from the peoples. There's a gap. There are several groups who think that the producers belong to a privileged sector. We have to take over this situation. We have to get that people involved and invite them to work together with us. When you walk the streets, there are some people still who think that producers, people who are the land owners, have very good economic situation. We have to work to change that mind. We have to integrate everyone. We talked about 4 areas among producers, but we have to make the country believe that we have to work together. Medium and small producers have to be included. regional economies should be included. And this is our daily work from where we are. And from the politics, we have to work towards this. As a senator, in my case, the congressman from his role, we have to pass laws, we get the consensus from national senators, like those passed for the aftermarket sector. We have, as Argentinians, to reconcile on these topics. As I said some years ago, involvement from the agricultural sector into politics is very important. We know which issues we have to face. Many times, people who are involved in politics do not know the challenges that we face from the producing sector. All the things that we had to face, we don't want to complain, we are not regretting, we need to get involved. This organization has worked hard to increase productivity for preservation. Soil conservation is a very important topic because, as our president said, soil does not belong to us. We are following this. We need to increase production, preserving the earth. Our task is crucial. What we do at different entities, and we need to make an effort. It's a hard work, mainly among Argentinians. It's very difficult to link farmers with citizens. Farmers should be considered as an individual. They are part of the society. We should include the rural residents into the urban residents' frame of mind, because the farmers should not be isolated to the production field. We have seen this in the condition, this is reflected in the condition of the agricultural sector, so we should get the added value to raw materials in our places so that people stay where they belong to and generate new labor. I know there are people who have taken a high commitment, but we need more support. We need to multiply support so that new jobs can also be created. We need to ask people to do what should be done concerning this alliance among the industry, the peoples, the rural growers. Partnerships should be set. We have wetlands laws, organic production laws. We are working on soil conservation. There are a lot of things we should tackle, and we will need the support from different organizations who have already paved our way to this. Farmers sometimes are distant to unions, but we have seen in other countries in the world, like in France, where trade unions have declined and new ways of productions are emerging. This is very important. It doesn't matter which organization you belong to, but the union has to be supported. Politics should be supported. We need to defend ourselves. We cannot expect others to defend us. We have to take it on our hands. I congratulate those who have come here today, but we are not enough. We need more support. And from the country's Senate Congress, we are doing as much as we can. Maybe you think that I do not pass new laws, but I have a responsibility along with the executive power to have all the laws passed through the executive power so that we get the best outcome, sustainable laws that can be adapted and adjusted. And we are working with responsibility from the congressman chamber also. It doesn't matter who is the person who is passing the new bill. The important thing is to pass sustainable bills. I will be glad to answer your questions. Thank you very much. I invite the congressman to take the floor. Thank you, Alfredo.
Deja que yo este otro, así hacemos uno cada uno. Thank you, Pedro, for the invitation to be part of this magnificent conference. It's a pleasure to share the stage and the panel with the senator from Nebraska, together with Pedro de Angeli, be here together in this nice meeting. This is a nice meeting because we are talking about things that concern us all as Argentinians, because we are all somehow involved in production. I said thank you, Pedro, because from here we can say what we understand and we can listen, we can hear you. And it's a pleasure to be here with the senator from Nebraska, who has such a fantastic project, this right to farm constitutional right, because that allows us see where food producers are heading to. We are currently invited to talk in this Aapresid conference where technology, innovation is discussed. We have been invited to this conference to talk about resilience, which is the capacity men have to readapt and move forward. This is a constant behavior for everyone, for all the community. But being invited by a farmers' association, we have to wonder, what is resilience? All of us who live in Argentina, we are farmers, and we have to readapt on a constant basis to bad policies. So when we talk about the right to farm, we find that we need sustainable policies to exercise our right to farm and see how to implement it in each location. Not long ago, the resilience we used to resist the former administration was to try to have a sustainable production with terrible tax burden, with taxes on exports. We could not adjust our balance sheets with inflation, and the farmers was always being pushed by a reality that continued to change year after year. That is ended, and we are now in a new phase, a new stage, a new time that forces us to rethink what we need now that we have a government that is our ally. We live in a virtuous land. We can produce much more than we produce currently, but we need certain conditions. So as a congressman, I am here to tell you that we want to work in the direction we want to work for you, do the things you are asking us to do. our legislation has to be in line with the world demand, because if our legislation does not match with world demand, we cannot sell our products to the international market. And when that happens, we need a public policy that puts all the players in the value chain to work towards exports, because unless we sell the world we sell our products to the world, we export our production, we will not be able to solve our problems. Many times we think we can do whatever we want, and that is not the case. We should do what we have to do in order to sell our products to the world, to the international market. And here we have many issues connected to the right to farm, because the right to farm also involves an obligation. Pedro this morning said, when he opened the conference, that we have a big responsibility, as big as the opportunity we have, as big as the challenge we face. We have to demand public policies that will put all the production in line with the possibility of exporting our products to the international market. We are seeing a terrible crisis in dairies. This started long ago. Argentina used to produce 10,000 million liters of milk, and now we produce only 11,000 million. But Brazil and Uruguay have increased their milk production by 30%, and that milk is exported. And we couldn't grow because we had different tariffs and different restrictions to export, and our dairy got stuck. And now, when we have a different opportunity, because we have no more tax on export for corn, now dairies are facing a terrible situation. This is when we need a government, a national government that gives responses to challenges. Unless we have a standard or an act on seeds that follows investigation, science, we will not be able to sell our products, because the world is ruled by different laws. We want to be part of a modern world, so we have to adapt our legislation to that modern developed world, because one day we will need to introduce the right to farm in our constitution, because the right to farm is an obligation, but also something that makes our lives more complicated. That old saying, that old phrase that we are using the land that our children have borrowed us, but we have to preserve that land in order to give it back as we received it, and with the policies like the ones the former administration enforced, that would be impossible. Sustainability was very difficult in those years, and it was very difficult to be environmentally sustainable. If you don't have a profit, you cannot have a company, and you cannot have production. Today, dairies are forced to think that they have to survive based on subsidies. And that is something terrible, because a farmer, a producer that produces a product that is demanded by the market should not demand a subsidy. It is like saying that Saudi Arabia needs subsidies to produce oil. We have to set new policies, we have to set new goals, new purposes, so that we, farmers, can enforce our rights, get in line with public policies that require the public sector and the private sector to discuss and work together. We should not continue fighting for profits and be fighting for it. We have to cooperate and find ways for the private sector and the public sector to sit at one same table and discuss common issues. We have institutions that can also contribute and help us draft a new policy that will let us tell that the right to farm is a reality in Argentina. Thank you.
Now we will continue with the Q&A session from the audience. I will start with a question. Mr. Kuehn, what happens with the right to farm in Nebraska, where the ag industry is important? What is the role of the federal government, and how is this considered from the national point of view?
Certainly, in terms of how it's viewed nationally, in America at this point, the right to farm is primarily a concept being generated by the states at a local level. So individual states are approaching this. We are seeing more ag states and legislators in individual ag states working together to promote it in our federalist system. Certainly, inaction at the federal level in a number of areas regarding ag policy is always a challenge. So the movement is primarily focused at the state level, where we have an opportunity to work through the details of the policy, see any unforeseen consequences, and then continue to move it forward as a more national concept.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Les quería preguntar a
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Alegre and the Angelis. There's a law around us, the wetlands law. For some producers, this law would imply a threat because the wetland has to be clearly defined. We can join this topic with the one of the right to farm, and of course resources have to be preserved. Thank you, Pedro. The wetlands bill is not express one. The best bills are not the quickest approved. The best are those which count with the widest participation involvement from organizations. As president of the Fishing, Livestock and Agricultural Commission, I asked involvement, and I think that at least 4 ministries have to consider that bill. There has to be a consensus reached, but also approved by the national ministries. We cannot pass a law which can't be observed by provinces. So we are working seriously. I think that needs improvement. There will be a great deal of discussion. There are many senators like me who do not want to approve it just as is. We want to improve this one. This is the first stage of the bill. We are talking about conservation, which is very good, but production is not included in that bill. So when we consider what may happen to the littoral area, Esteros de Liberá, there are people living there, people who produce the fields there, or in the delta in Entre Rios. We see there needs to be an in-depth analysis. How many wetlands are there in Argentina? All of them cannot fall under the same category. There are areas in Jujuy. The islands in the south, in the Tantra, are also wetlands, just like the Esteros de Liberá and many other wetlands. We are immersed in an intensive discussion. It will take a long time. It doesn't matter how long. What we want is to get the best law legislation that can be sustained over time. I agree with Senator De Angelis. Discussion is required. Consensus will be difficult to reach if there is no clear definition. Livestock production activities will be affected. The Salado Basin is included under the concept of wetlands. The Bashimanca Basin also is a wetland area where breeding takes place in Argentina. There needs to be a clear definition, as I was saying, as we were talking about the Esteros de Libra. If the forest, soil, and wetlands law is applied, well, the field for production will fall below the 30%. Therefore, we need to discuss in depth this topic. There's no need to hurry. There are other topics like regional economies which should be addressed more quickly. This will be a controversial topic. A bill can't be passed if it has not been studied from all sectors. It could have a heavy impact on livestock production, and it plays a key role in Argentina. I have a question for Senator John Kuehn. As I understand, there's a new federal legislation regarding labeling of products. What is your opinion? Can you elaborate on this, please?
Definitely going for the hot button issues, I see. Certainly, the United States Congress just passed a compromise bill on GMO labeling in foods. Personally, I am disappointed in seeing this move at the federal level because, again, it is not based in the science of GMO and precision agriculture. Rather, it is based and perpetuates fear and misunderstanding of genetically modified organisms, what they are, and what really they represent within our foodstuffs. I understand the political objective of creating a federal law that would prevent a patchwork of individual state laws, which was part of the urgency for the U.S. Federal GMO labeling law. The state of Vermont had passed a law which would go into effect in July that would have created some very strict labeling standards. What was missing from that discussion and that debate is the science behind GMOs and what they really truly represent as a portion of our food supply. Consumers are frequently misled to assume that a genetically modified organism presents a threat to their health and safety, that it is something foreign. And because that is reinforced by some of these GMO labeling laws, it does present a significant threat, I think, to the use of technology in agriculture. And it also begs a series of very important questions. So, for example, the vast majority of the corn produced in the United States that is ultimately fed to cattle contains a genetically modified organism. So our cattle that have been fed and the beef that is the production of cattle that have been fed genetically modified organisms, where does that fit into GMO labeling? And how do we label that? And what can consumers actually make in terms of those decisions? So I am not comfortable with the fact that we have now passed a federal law that does not reinforce science-based policy. And I look forward to continuing to elevate the discussion of the role of technology among consumers and producers as well as among policymakers.
Thank you very much, John. Hay otro tema que
There is another concern for farmers, which has been addressed differently from each community. It has to do with the peri-urban approaches. What are your opinions, Senators?
I believe that there should be a federal law that would be consistent in terms of peri-urban applications or spraying, because each municipality, each province is issuing a new law and enforcing them, and this is leading us to anarchy. I think it's a topic where undoubtedly the private and the public sector should be part in the discussion. There should be some federal control on the issue. We have foundations that fight against foot and mouth disease. We are controlling vaccination in order to eliminate foot and mouth disease from our livestock. Well, I think spraying should also be controlled by farmers. We have to identify farmers who rent their land and, of course, receive advice from environmental and climate experts to know when to spray, and that will help us solve the problem that currently is a big issue. This is one of the biggest issues, and the presence of the state guarantees where we are heading to. Unless the state is present, there will be anarchy, and that is complex for production. Yes, of course, I agree with the congressman. I believe that the government has been absent, and many farmers has not been responsible enough. Unless the government has some control, some irresponsible farmers do spraying not in a proper way. They leave the empty container anywhere that can be touched by a child or use it in his home, and that brings terrible consequences. Or sprayers that is not aware or not properly trained to do this, or to do the spraying under safe conditions. I think the state has only one vehicle and 2 employees to control spraying. I think that the federal government should do something, and we farmers, we are not all irresponsible, but I do know some are, though I do believe that most farmers are very responsible. But it's a sin to leave an empty container near a course of water or accessible to anyone in the field. Sometimes provincial governments or municipal governments cannot control these things, even though some do. Let me say that we are doing a pilot test in Tres Banderas to certify at municipal level, where municipalities will be able to certify protocols, spraying protocols, because these protocols follow all the standards Iran has established. This is a very interesting project. There is one last question. Let me finish first. Let me highlight that many entities, such as rural societies, like the one in Gualeguaychú, that request farmers to bring the containers, and the rural society is collecting these containers, because there are irresponsible farmers, but there are very responsible people. One last question to Senator Kuehn. How strong are unions in the United States when compared to unions in Argentina?
Unions with regard to agriculture are essentially non-existent as far as agricultural production unions in the United States. Most of our labor unions are focused around manufacturing, some of the vocational trades, and in education. And certainly in those sectors, they are very powerful politically, and they command a significant component of the dialogue, both in terms of the media cycle and in terms of political influence. in the agricultural sector, while we do not have organized unions in the same manner to promote activism, we tend to have much more of a grassroots structure that's not a formal union, but rather is represented around producer groups, whether those are livestock producer groups, corn grower producer groups, etc. We have a checkoff system in the United States for all of our agricultural commodities, that a small proportion of every unit, whether that's bushel or animal that is sold, is collected and goes for research and education efforts, and so serves that means of representing the industry in a way that to some degree your unions do in Argentina, but a distinctly different system from what you have here.
Muy bien, bueno, les agradecemos a los tres.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to discuss with farmers. We have a challenge ahead to continue producing, explaining the community how we do so. I hope this has been of interest for you.
Argentina, whenever you want. Muchas gracias a todos y seguimos.